the meeting is now live streaming. You can start whenever you and Ashley are ready.
Okay. And how are we doing on a quorum? I can't see most of the people here.
As of now, we have a quorum. The only person that is not here yet is President Jones.
Okay. We'll give the council president a minute to see if he comes.
Yo, I sent him a text message.
I am going to call this meeting of the Cuyahoga County Finance and Budgeting Committee to order and ask the clerk to please call the roll.
On the roll, Mr. Miller,
Here.
Mr. Tuma,
Here.
Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones is absent at the moment. Mr. Gallagher,
Here.
Mr. Shrine,
Here.
Ms. Brown,
Here.
Ms. Baker.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. And the next item on the agenda is public comment. Has any public comment been turned in?
No, Mr. Chair, no one submitted any public comment.
Okay, and we come to item number 4, which is approval of the minutes from the March 29th, 2021 meeting. Do we have a motion relative to those minutes?
So move to approve.
Second, Brown.
Okay, it's been moved by Councilman Tron and seconded by Councilwoman Brown to approve the minutes for the last meeting of Finance and Budgeting Committee. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The minutes from the last meeting are approved, and we have one resolution to consider today, and that is resolution number 2021-0111.
Resolution number 2021-0111, amending the 2020-2021 biennial operating budget for 2021 by providing for additional fiscal appropriations from the general fund and other funding sources for appropriation transfers between budget accounts and for cash transfers between budgetary funds to meet the budgetary needs of various county departments, offices, and agencies, amending resolution number 2021-0044, dated February 9, 2021.
Thank you very much. That item's before us. My understanding is that Director Parfiowitz will introduce the legislation and then call upon Tim Luby to continue the presentation. Please proceed.
Good afternoon, everyone. This agenda item seeks $5,681,000 in additional appropriation for a proposed new contract with Integrated Precision Systems for a new security system at the Juvenile Justice Center. This appropriation will cover the capital portion of the costs, including installation at $1,736,000 and licensing at $3,945,000 over the next 5 years. I have Tim Luby and others from the juvenile court to go over the procurement process and also their recommendation of IPS for this new system.
Good afternoon, members of council. This is Tim Luby, the fiscal director from the juvenile court. As Walter indicated, we are here seeking your approval for an increase in appropriations to cover the replacement of the security system that currently operates in the court's throughout the court's juvenile detention facility. This was an RFP process that began back in October of 2020. It concluded in November of 2020 with 2 responsive bids, one from Black Creek and one from IPS. After a thorough review by the court security committee, It was ultimately determined that IPS was both the most responsive and the most economical for this project. And so I have members of the Court Security Committee here to answer any specific questions that council may have. And ultimately, we are seeking your permission to move forward with this appropriation.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. And I would ask if you could give us a little bit more detail on what the system consists of and to what extent is it an upgrade of what we currently have?
Most certainly. I'm going to ask Mr. Brandon Winarchek, the superintendent of the court's detention facility, to answer that question, Councilman. Mr. Winarchek.
Good afternoon, everyone. Certainly, I can answer that for you. What we're really talking about is two core components of the operation of the court and detention center. We're talking about the physical security system, the electronic security system itself, and this would be a complete overhaul minus the wiring infrastructure that is still viable. We'd be replacing all of the inline servers. We'd be replacing all of the security cameras, including any that are currently not functional or not operational. We'd be replacing all of the intercom equipment, and we would not only just be replacing things that are all of the equipment presently is at end of life. So it's no longer supported. It's not able to be upgraded one at a time, or even replacements found for those that become suspect or inoperable. So we're talking about upgrading to the latest technology. So if you would imagine where the televisions in your living room were 12 years ago, and then imagine what the technology is today. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about going to high resolution video, which with greater camera coverage. So just better security functions for the building, greater operability and interactivity with the youth, and ability to secure them and monitor them. For the detention management side, that was one of the pieces that we thought was integral to upgrade as well. The detention management system is really our way of tracking youth from the time of point of first contact in the detention center all the way through their time of release. So interactivity between our department and the medical department, the mental health department, tracking nutritional needs and food allergies, tracking those that need to be kept separate from one another because of charges that are pending or personality differences that have led to misbehavior and or injuries in the past. And all of those things with today's technology become available to our staff in real time. So the staff supervising the youth have a better ability to provide services and to supervise the youth. And the IPS specifically, they partnered with a company called Jail Tracker to provide that additional software piece for the DMS. And the presentation that they provided, they're very much going to incorporate their technologies into what we do every day. So systems that we have existing in the detention center as far as reports that we draft, data that we collect, data that we analyze, they're seeking to integrate all of that into a much smoother, one person inputs the data, it processes the data, and removes some redundancies out of that process as well. So there's some, not only is the data available to the end user in real time to keep them better informed and on top of the safety and security and health needs of our youth, but it also should reduce some office redundancies and increase efficiencies.
Okay, thank you very much. I have some additional questions, but at this time, I'm going to see what questions my colleagues have on this.
Mr. Chairman,
Councilman Tron.
what's the cost differences as far as the annual maintenance service on the one we're replacing with versus the one that we currently have?
Sorry for that.
If we,
Go ahead.
Tim, were you going to handle it?
I can handle part of that. Go ahead, Brandon.
Go ahead. Why don't you start, Tim, and I'll pick up whatever you don't have.
Yeah. So the current maintenance cost for the existing system is $160,000 a year. but I don't know that that gives you the full picture of where we need to go. And so I defer to Brandon on that regard.
So it's a difficult question to answer directly. I do have a breakdown here of year over year, the costs for the annual maintenance fees in and of themselves for the IPS proposed solution. And they vary over the years because there's an anticipation. We're seeking to go with the capital model so that, anything that would be, the operating model. We're looking to go with the operating model, and that's anything that would be nothing would ever become out of service or out of lifespan, usable lifespan during the course of the contract. So that anything that would go bad, they would be able to replace, and if an upgrade to some other component was necessary because of that they would tend to that as well with the operational model. So the year-over-year costs increase. They vary on this matrix that I have from year one. Just over $350,000 to about $600,000 by year 5. But that's tending to the technologies. The equipment, the modern day equipment is pricier, more expensive. It's more capable than some of the things in the past. And there are additional fees that are going to be incurred. The current solution maintains all data on site. So in the event of some sort of catastrophic failure or emergency here, we would lose all data. There's not really a redundant data strategy. The RFP requested and IPS did propose an off-site data storage. So there will be some additional fees incurred for that as well. So it's difficult to make an apples to apples comparison because they're really providing much different services.
But it sounds like it's almost 4 times as much, 400% more. Is that what I understood?
Than the present system?
Yes.
Yes, but the proposed prices for I can't actually speak. Black Creek did not delineate out their year-over-year annual maintenance fees separately if you were to go with them for the operating model moving forward. So they didn't list that out as a separate line item, but based on the pricing, they did incur some of those increases in there.
Well, that'd be a logical thing to ask. How hard would it be to find out what the annual maintenance is that's built into those numbers?
We can certainly follow up with it. Go ahead, Brandon.
We in point of fact, we did ask, and I mean, the question is, if the answer is the annual maintenance fees are included in the pricing payments, is how they answered the question. So they didn't break it out separately.
I've never heard of anybody not be able to tell you, break those out. They're 2 separate transactions. You wouldn't buy a Microsoft product without knowing if you have to buy a maintenance and service agreement on your servers. You wouldn't buy anything else like that. I'm kind of surprised that we don't have that number as to what makes up the maintenance on it.
It was certainly one of the factors that the security committee considered as they were evaluating the 2 vendors, and Black Creek's proposal was not responsive in many ways. And so that was a factor in considering IPS to be more responsive.
But you asked them what their annual maintenance is, and you tell me that's more responsive to tell you no answer? I'm sorry, but that seems to be a little lacking as far as what part is capital and what part is annual maintenance.
And just to be clear, that was the current vendor, Black Creek, that was not responsive. The proposed
okay.
vendor.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, the proposed vendor did give us a detailed breakdown.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Certainly.
Other questions by my colleagues?
Nan Baker, just a quick question.
Please proceed.
Well, just to understand at the top of your introduction of this, was this is a $5 million funding that we're being asked, and 1 million is the installation and 3 million are the licenses? Is that what I heard?
So I would go ahead. I would defer to OBM on this. So the total cost for this project over 5 years is $9,881,369. That consists of obviously multiple different components to the councilman's earlier question. Some of that, I believe, is what we are here in front of council today is really just the capital expenses of this. And so that is the initial base contract, which is $1,667,280,000. There's a maintenance portion of that. There's a licensing portion of that. And then because of this model, there's some financing costs as well. So the total, and again, I don't want to confuse anybody, the total operating expense for the first year, which is going to include some of these being capital expenses, is $3,185,303. I don't know if that's responsive to your question, Councilwoman, or not.
Yes, I just jotted down what I heard and I wasn't sure I quite understood it. I thought what was said was 5 million was for the installation, or 5 million was the funding ask. 1 million was for the installation and 3 million was for the licenses. And I was just asking for a little more detail if I got it wrong.
No, you're correct, Councilwoman Baker.
I'm correct on that.
Yeah, the 5 million is the initial cost of labor, followed by the hardware and licensing costs. That's what the total is, the 5 million that we're seeking now. The portion I believe that Tim's referring to is the annual service cost, which is, it looks like about $840,000 each year on top of that to get to $9 million over 5 years.
Okay. And as with Councilman Schron's question, can you break out what we're paying in the licensing costs? What is that?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. So, and I can send, we've actually followed up since we initially reached out to Walter to begin this process with the vendor and have more detailed breakouts on all of these line items. And so I can send that to Walter for just dissemination to council. But so for example, in year one, the initial base contract is $1,667,280. There is a annual maintenance fee that first year of $357,096. There is a annual license fee in that first year of $370,278. There is an allocation for wiring of $68,177. Now, we're not anticipating definitively that we're going to need all of that, but that was what the vendor estimated as a potential. And then finally, the last cost for the first year is the financing and interest charges of $722,473. That all totals for the first year of $3,185,303.
Okay, so if I may, so that is what the funding ask is for the first year. So the
Yes.
5 million that we were at the top of the meeting, that's for, part of that is for future years?
And again, I want to defer to Walter on this, but I think what they've done is ask for part of this as a capital outlay versus some of these would not necessarily fall into the category of a capital expense.
That is correct. We've asked only for the capital piece of this. That's the $5 million number. And on top of that would be annual service costs of approximately $839,000 each year that we would be asking for in addition to this amount.
Okay, that helps. Thank you.
Sure, certainly. I'd gladly send you over the schedule that I have if you'd like.
Okay, that'd be nice. Thanks.
So by way of follow-up, why is there financing and interest costs? We have enough money to buy this up front if we want to.
So I would defer to Brandon on that. Brandon, do you want to speak to the reason why we went with the OPEX model versus the CAPEX model?
Certainly. So the fundamental difference between the two is if we use a large cash outlay now, and we were to purchase this in its entirety, there are still annual maintenance fees just for the upkeep of the system. However, as the system ages, its usefulness will deteriorate, and ultimately you will require another large, capital investment to do a from the ground up replacement like what we're talking about right now. The system as it exists presently within our facility was installed, at the time of construction in the building. So it has long since exceeded its useful life expectancy. Though various components within the system itself have different life expectancies, the average for most of the parts is about 7 years. And we're on year like 11/12 for the things that are in the building, which is why we're at the point of obsolescence. And it's not just that we can't get replacement cameras. Even if we got cameras that are newer, better, and do what we would need them to do, they don't plug into the rest of the equipment that we have. So you're talking about a from the ground up infusion of cash. If you went with the operational model, the idea behind the operational model is you're defraying that expense over time. And you're also in having a heightened level of viability of the system year over year. Because when something goes bad, if something that it attaches to needs to be replaced to upgrade it or to replace it, that will be taken care of as well. So it essentially is a guarantee of continued operationality and functionality throughout the life of the contract. Whereas right now, when we have loss of video somewhere, if it's not something that can just be rebooted, turned on, diagnosed as a on-site glitch, if it's actual hardware failure, there's nothing we can do about it.
So
the idea was that we would seek to have the full functionality and go with the operational model. If you look at the average life expectancy of the pieces, the vendors kind of played this out over time. Specifically, IPS did. And by the time you hit your 10-year, you're at cost savings. By the time you're at your 15-year, you're at some significant cost savings over the repetitive, full upgrade.
So are you saying that this is actually more like a service agreement or an extended warranty as opposed to buying it partially on credit?
Correct.
Other questions by my colleagues?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
who's on the committee?
Brandon, can you speak to that?
I'm sorry, is the question as to who was on the committee on this end as far as the selection committee?
Yes.
Would you prefer to have the individuals or departments?
Just name who was on it.
Okay, no problem. There was Tom Renner. He's the deputy court administrator here at the court. You had the superintendent of the detention facility, Brandon Winarchik, deputy director of security, Jay Leeworthy. You had fiscal department at the juvenile court, Sarah Baker. We had Ann McDonough from the legal department at the detention center, Cal Alnazar with the IT department at the detention center, Jared Farrell at the detention center IT department, Alan Kilgore and Stan Klazowski from the county IT, and Laura Sims from the county sheriff's department.
Oh, so the sheriff's department was part of this?
That is correct.
And can I assume that in the detention center itself that the blind spots that we had are no longer going to exist?
Correct. Yes, that's correct. They are going to be addressed with the upgrade.
Okay. And just for information, do all the security there wear cameras?
No, currently we do not have body-worn cameras by the staff.
And
by the detention staff.
When will you be doing that?
We're currently looking at a process to have the frontline supervision. They're going to begin that process of getting body cameras, and we'll be eventually working to the line staff themselves, but we want to have at least our frontline supervision with that capability, with more immediacy.
Okay, and I would
We have 6, I apologize. We have 6 cameras in our facility, but that is not connected to the security project itself. That's running on its own side project.
Right, right. Okay. I would recommend that the sheriff's department also be brought in minimally as a consultant on that. We need to camera up in these facilities. Thank you.
So I have another question in a different area, which is that Chuck Cavano from Budget and Management did an analysis and said that the courts have special revenue funds which could partially be used to finance this program so that it doesn't all have to come out of the general fund. But the courts did not recommend using any of the special revenue funds, and I'd like a little bit more elaboration on why no special revenue funds were proposed to be used for this purpose, if that indeed is correct.
Good afternoon. So I can speak to that, Councilman. In response, there was a question posed by council as to our special revenue funds, and the court did provide, in response to that question, a list of all of our existing special revenue funds and their current balances. And so hopefully you have that before you.
Yes, I have seen it. I don't know if everybody else has it.
Okay, and so just to give you a listing of the actual titles of those various special revenue funds. So there is and they're fairly limited. There's only 9 of them total. There is a indigent alcohol drivers fund. There is a legal computerization fund. There is a legal research fund. There's a Title IV-E fund, that's a maintenance fee. A Title IV-E administration. There's another one titled forfeited property. One more called ADR, and then a final one titled Indigent Driver Interlock Alcohol Monitoring. And so I would submit to council that so some of those funds are federal money. The bulk of those are Title IV-E funds, and 4E is a very unique program that the court is able to take advantage of. And I would submit that none of those 4Es would be appropriate for a security related. In fact, those are the bulk of where the court has its funds. I think there's $2 million right now that exists in the 4E funds. There's only $2 million remaining from all of the other fees combined. And those, based on their creation, are limited by statute and how they can be utilized. And I would submit to council that none of them would fall within the legally permissible category of a security project. So I don't know if that answers your question, Councilman.
I appreciate that response, and I would like to ask if OBM has any comment, because at least the staff report seemed to suggest that a different conclusion might be possible.
Councilman Miller, at this point, I'd have to look into those funds a little further. I'm not prepared to comment on that.
Okay, well, that is certainly understandable, and I believe that it's worth taking some time to get a definitive determination on that, and I would like to ask that OBM and juvenile court work together on that between now and the next meeting, and try to come back with a definitive and agreed upon sense as to whether some of these special revenue funds can be used, and if so, to come up with an appropriate number so that the cost could be shared. One other thing is that I would also like right now, I have no good sense of what the, how the all-in costs for the new system compare with the current system. And what I would like is for, as I understand it, the current system's been in operation for about 10 years. And so I would like to assume a 10-year amortization on capital costs and to add up the capital costs and all of the operating and licensing costs over 10 years and come up with an estimate of what the annual amount we've been paying over the last 10 years is and what the estimated annual amount that we're going to be paying for the new system over the next 10 years so that we can get some idea of is it about the same? Is it half again as much? Is it twice as much? I gotta confess that right now I have no idea. So I would like to get that as well.
Certainly. Councilman, if I can just ask for clarification, and then Brandon, you may interject here as well, just to assist. To make sure we're clear, because if I understand correctly right now with the dynamic with the existing vendor and the existing hardware, because of it having reached its end of life, even the existing vendor is indicating in their proposal substantial cost increases. And so would that be a number that you also want to include from an apples to apples comparison?
I'm actually focusing on what the last 10-year costs have been on an annual basis and what it's going to be over the next 10 years. I'm kind of assuming that it would be more money regardless of which vendor we go with, you know, so I'm not
Understood.
sure. I'm not sure that if we say, I mean, if you can come up with a going forward annualized cost for both prospective vendors, yeah, that would be interesting, but that's not exactly where I was focused.
Okay.
Any other
Yes.
any other comments or questions by my colleagues?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Just wondering, does the court, much like other courts, have an IT/computer fund?
Yes, Councilman, we do. That was one of the items that was identified in our special revenue funds. So that is the legal computerization fund. And right now, the balance of that fund is $242,000.
So that could go towards this.
It would be quite, I have to be honest with you, I'd have to seek legal guidance on that because of that's a statutory created fee. And the question would be whether or not under the terms of the statute, the essence of the security project would fit within the parameters. And I honestly couldn't answer that question as we sit here today.
Well, it seems to me that's something you should have looked at because there's no question this is IT generated and related. So if you could look into that, I'd appreciate it.
Certainly.
Okay, anything else from my colleagues?
Just one, if I may.
Yes, you may.
I just want to make sure I have clarification of what we're approving today. The agenda reads in the backup, 5.6 million. And it's to propose contract with IPS for a new security system. It says the appropriation will cover the capital portion of the cost, including installation of 1.7, hardware and licensing 3.9 over the next 5 years. So we're approving that today. What is the other, how does the other fit into this? The financing and interest, the number that gets us to the 3.185 that was said earlier. And I'm just a little confused on what's being proposed and what is going to be used by the request today.
And I would defer to OBM in the sense of how they've allocated the funding. When we were originally looking at this project, we kind of came forward and said, we're anticipating the total cost to be $9,881,369. And so this was the process by which we were directed to kind of proceed. And so certainly we're not trying to play hide the ball. There are additional costs associated with this. And I believe it was OBM's intent to kind of move forward with the capital expenses first, but I would defer to them.
That is correct. Councilwoman Miller, the 1.7 is the installation cost. The other 3.9 is the hardware cost. And that's what we're asking for today. That's the capital portion. What's missing here is the annual service cost, which would be about $840,000 each year for the next 5 years.
And also the financing costs too, right?
Those I don't have included in any of my numbers.
But it's a real number that has been discussed and will be needed, won't it?
Yeah, it may be included in this annual service cost that IPS provided, but I didn't get a breakdown of that.
Walter, do you think it's important that we have a concrete number of what it is that's going to be needed? I know the number of 9.8 million was
Absolutely
out there, but do we have a good idea of what all this is going to be costing us?
I do have the $9.8 million is exactly the number.
Okay. And of that 9.8, we are approving 5.6 of it because those are the capital costs.
Those are the capital costs, upfront costs. Absolutely.
We can anticipate another 3 to 4 million
over the next 5 years.
Okay, that helps. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So just to follow up on that, Councilwoman Baker had a very good question, and I would like to specifically know how the financing costs fit into this, whether it exists somewhere separately or whether it's included within that annual maintenance cost.
And I can provide that to Walter for council as well. We have a detailed breakdown per year for all of those costs.
Okay, thank you.
Certainly.
Okay, so hearing nothing else, and if there's no objection, we're gonna hold this until the next committee meeting and get more information about the special revenue funds and the role they could play, and also about the all-in costs over the life of the project and the detailed breakdown. So we'll bring that information back and hopefully be ready to move forward at the next meeting. So the next item on the agenda is the preview on the American Recovery Act, and I would just like to provide the following brief background. On March 11th, 2021, the American Recovery Act was signed into law. The legislation is expected to provide $241 million in assistance for Cuyahoga County. The first half of the legislation is expected to be available shortly, and the second half to be available about a year later. All of the funds must be spent by the end of calendar year 2024. We're expecting additional federal guidance shortly on how the money can be spent. The initial guidance provided 4 broad categories of allowable expense. One is assistance directly related to the pandemic, either health related or to help people, businesses, and organizations deal with the economic impacts. Second is hazard pay for workers in direct risk of exposure to COVID-19. The third is provision of basic services. To the extent that funds used in this way replace revenue that was directly lost due to the pandemic. And fourth, water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. These categories create a wide range of possibilities as to how we can spend this money. I would encourage my colleagues to start thinking about it, and I would like to see the council involved in this in an earlier and more interactive way than we did with the CARES Act. I will schedule an update and more discussion as soon as we receive the detailed guidance. So at this point, I would ask whether any of my colleagues or the administration have any comment about the American Recovery Act.
I have one question, Chair.
Yes,
Cleveland, I'm reading, is going to be receiving 541 million. And Cleveland is part of Cuyahoga County. So how do we not include Cleveland, or how does that, how do we anticipate our partnership with Cleveland, given they're getting so much?
I think that's one of the many questions that's a very valid point of discussion, and I don't want to try to speak for anybody other than to say that that we probably should certainly have some discussions with the city of Cleveland, because there may be some ways that we can coordinate some of our efforts, and I think there's also some other communities in Cuyahoga County that are also receiving money. I don't think it's limited to Cleveland.
Okay.
So that's a good question.
Okay, good. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Anything else? Okay, well, this is going to be an important area of further discussion. And the final item on the agenda is the preview on the reserves policy legislation, which I've talked to many of you about. That legislation needs a little bit more work before going forward, so I'm going to defer that for today and to ask if anybody has any miscellaneous business. Hearing none, and there being no further business, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved, Brown.
Second, Baker.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Ayes have it, and we are adjourned. Thanks, everybody, very much for your time and attention.